All right. So fallacy number two. I'm gonna take time off to write. I just I can't get my thoughts together. I'm gonna take some time off and I'm gonna write. I'm gonna go get a cabin in the woods.
Keep your day job.
Really.
Absolutely. It is. It just. Well, first of all, thinking that that's going to solve your problems is a little bit myopic. And second of all, just the reality is that having other obligations tends to kind of put our feet to the fire when it comes to our creative aspirations. When you have to work 40 hours a week, you have a limited amount of time in which you can write. When you don't have anything else, any other obligations, right? Everything is sort of free form. There's not, and sometimes it can become much harder to focus and much harder to actually be productive. Also, what I would say is this, and this is probably the most important part. The whole idea that I need to take time off, that I need to quit my day job in order to write, or take lots of time off from my job in order to write, is based on a misunderstanding about the way we should be approaching the process as writers. It's very counterproductive to sit down and think of it in terms of, I need to write my script, right? Because when you think I have to write a script, well, if you're a screenwriter, that means it's somewhere between 90 and 120 pages probably, and that's a big thing. And oh my God, I have to write my script. And that can lead to you actually getting nothing done because it seems too overwhelming. As writers, we need to get better at breaking the process into specific tasks and setting goals for ourselves that are achievable in shorter amounts of time. And when you do that, not only do you solve the I need to take time off from work issue, but all sorts of other things that are good start to happen because you stop writing in a linear fashion. You stop thinking about this as point A to point B to point C, page 1 to page 2 to page 10 to page 100, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you start thinking about it in a much more productive, non-linear fashion where you're developing aspects of your story, aspects of your characters, aspects of the relationships, aspects of whatever is unique about your approach. And that becomes your task for however much amount of time you have each day, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or whatever.
No, it's true. The feeling of fulfillment is inspiring all in itself. You know, if you feel like you're on some Sisyphusian task of
Can you say that again, please?
Sisyphusian.
Can you say it 5 times fast?
No. But you know, an impossible task. The impossible task of somehow getting your idea, you know, 120 pages out, perfectly formatted, first go. That can seem daunting, and the second that you get blocked, and yeah, Ivy, I'm getting to your question. When you get blocked, then you got to sit around, or people tend to sit around until the block magically goes away.
By the way,
what you're talking about is that, right? Breaking it down into manageable, goal-oriented, easier to accomplish tasks that are defined.
yeah, absolutely. You need to. A lot of people think that if you put limits on your brainstorming, you're actually squelching your creativity. And
Can you repeat that?
that if you put limits on your brainstorming,
Yeah.
that you're actually cutting off your creativity. And nothing could be further from the truth. The truth of the matter is that when you give yourself specific boundaries, you actually give yourself the opportunity to be more creative, because it's impossible to create in a vacuum. There are too many choices, right? If you start to give yourself boundaries, limits, right? My character is like this. It's set in this town. This is my genre, whatever it is, right? Then actually your ideas will start to flow a lot more.
So you're talking about a creative process.
Yeah, I'm talking a little bit about creative process. Yeah, and also
is there can you use that in another example? That has nothing to do with writing.
Can I use it? Well, I mean,
the realm of either, I don't know, music, dance, painting, sculpture.
well, I'm not an expert in any of those areas.
Okay. But no, like I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, I thought this is where you were going, and I can maybe answer the question this way, that I am still, even at this point in my life, I am a huge fan of the Robert Pirsig book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and it had a
One of my favorite books.
huge impact on me, and partly because I read it when I was young, and so and it's that sort of book that is, if you read it and you dig it and you understand it, it's going to have a big impact on you. But he talks about when he's teaching at that, I guess it's a college in Montana, and he was teaching this, I guess, just expository writing program for freshmen, and he gave this assignment to write about your hometown, right?
Yeah.
And one of the best students in his class, she didn't know what to write. She was stuck, right? So he says, okay, well, why don't you just write about a street in your town, right? And she was still stuck. And so he said, okay, pick a block on that street, still stuck. And then, all right, one building on that street, the door on the front of that building, the doorknob, right? And she kept getting more and more and more specific. And by the time it finally got to a point where it was specific enough that she just opened up. And she wrote this brilliant, like 5 or 6 page essay because the possibilities had been narrowed down for her, the boundaries, and that actually made it easier for her to brainstorm her idea.
So the name of that book is Zen
And the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
by
Robert Pirsig Jr., I believe.
great book. Absolutely recommend. Must read. Ivie's got a question. Hi, Ivie.
Hello, Ivie.
I'm gonna actually read it. Read her question. I'm not a writer, but I do have a question. I hear all the time writers having writer's block. Is that really true? And also, how do writers break out of that block, especially if they are in a time constraint like television writers? And before, I'll give you a second to think about that answer.
It's an easy question, actually.
That's actually one of the reasons that Kevin is our guest tonight. We had a plea on Facebook about writer's block that was so heartfelt that that we decided, let's talk about this. Let's address it. Let's take the mystery and the difficulty out of this and see if we can be of service.
Well, the first thing I will say is that the idea of writer's block is one of the biggest arguments for having a process. Because if you have a process, then you always have things you can do if you get stuck. And if you stop thinking about developing your project in a linear fashion, then you realize, well, if I got stuck at this point, that doesn't matter because I can just go on to this other thing that's somewhere else in the story, right? And I can develop that instead. And that alone, approaching and just thinking about approaching your project that way will unstick a lot of people, right? You don't have to go in order, right? In the end, it's going to be presented in a specific order. That's your plot. And we have plots so that your story makes sense to people. But as you're developing it, you have absolutely no obligation to go in the order of the plot. You write what you know first, right? And because the more that you write, the more that you know. And so you can always go back and fill in the gaps of the things you got stuck with. So that's the first thing. And that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that people have to become comfortable with the idea that probably 80% of writing is staring at the wall. And what I mean by that is even if you're not typing away, you still are being productive. I mean, you have to sometimes just meditate. You have to let the ideas percolate. And just because they're not coming out right now doesn't mean you're not working. It doesn't mean that the creative process isn't going on, but people get panicked and they think, oh my God, I can't think of what to write. And so all of a sudden I have writer's block. Mm-hmm. When in fact, it's probably just a very normal part of the process of doing anything creative. And what I would say is, number one, let yourself have those moments. Let yourself have those moments when you're just staring at the wall, whatever that means for you. For some people, staring at the wall means going for a walk. For other people, it means going shopping or playing a video game or exercising or whatever it is that you need to do to just, take the pressure off, not be so hard on yourself, and just give the ideas a chance to percolate and come out on their own. And that sort of kind of gets to the last thing I would say, which is that every creative person needs to identify things that they love to do that have nothing to do with being an actor or being a writer or being a director or being a cinematographer or whatever. Things that are sort of your fallback plan for your day. So if you're supposed to be writing, if you set a goal for yourself that I'm going to write for 2 hours today, but you get stuck, well, go do the thing that you love to do, whatever that is. Have that fallback plan, because chances are if you go, I mean, all of this is play anyway, right? I mean, all of creation is play. And if you get stuck, it means that you're not in the flow of that play anymore. So go play, whatever that means. And you can feel okay about that, because that is actually work too, even though it's play, because you're getting yourself back into that mindset. You're freeing yourself up.
So what
by
happens
doing something that you love?
So what happens if you are under a time constraint, like a television show, as Ivy points out? You know, if you're sitting in a writer's room and it's time to get those final pages out because everybody's waiting on set to see what's going to happen.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I don't pretend to be an expert about exactly what the reality of being a television writer is.
Okay.
I do know a lot about it, but I wouldn't want to say something as a proposed expert and as a purported expert, excuse me, and have someone out there who knows way better than I do say, "What the hell is that guy talking about?"
Right.
But what I will tell you, what I can say is that this is probably one of the biggest reasons why TV shows have teams, especially half-hour TV shows, so that it's not just one person.
So it's a brainstorming session amongst professionals and colleagues.
And the other thing I would say is, look, that's the nature of television. And every once in a while, unfortunately, if that's the world you want to live in, and there's no judgment. I mean, if that's the world you want to live in, every once in a while you're going to have to suck it up and just say, you know what, this blows. And I have no choice because I have to get it done. I just have to do it.
Right.
And every once in a while that happens. And you notice that the shows where that doesn't happen tend to be the shows that have more flexible broadcast schedules. Things like on HBO or Showtime or whatever, where, you know what, if David Chase doesn't want to release a new episode of Sopranos this year because he's not ready, okay, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a reason that shows like that are so good on a writing level, and that's why, because that's part of why, because they have that flexibility. Because if they're not ready to go, they just don't go. So hopefully that answers your question, Ivy.
Yeah.